Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel on the Kiss the Ground film. We're so extremely excited for everyone to be here today. And thanks so much to Ryland, Rebecca, and Josh for being here with us. We're really excited to learn from you.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here. We love the CR Club, so it's really an honor to be in this conversation with you.
And this is
Likewise,
just so.
Thank you.
And it's such a great link to your film. I've just recently watched it again myself, and I think it has a message that really appeals to so many people. I know I've been at my bank or the grocery store and happened to start a conversation about this film, and people have been so enthusiastic.
That's great.
I love hearing that.
You must have a great bank and a great grocery store.
I guess I'm lucky that way. But I think this is a message that really can appeal to so many people, and we're seeing that with such a huge amount of interest in this panel.
Wonderful.
Well, and we're also joined by Ramón, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ramón now. Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thanks so much. And sorry for being a minute late or two. You know, I was in this other panel with Jane Fonda and Randy Weingarten, and it was very exciting. You know, all the momentum that it's happening in the country right now. You know, and it's amazing that you know, the president with just 50 days, you know, signed the biggest relief package, you know, in almost a century. So. So very exciting things happening, and so welcome everyone. You know, it's great to be here with all of you today. I know that you know, there are other events happening right now at the moment, so we appreciate your commitment to this topic, and we're very excited to have you. You know, thanks so much for coming together. I don't know if in the minute before I was introduced, but I'm Ramón Cruz. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I am the president of the Sierra Club, which is the nation's largest grassroots environmental organization with nearly 4 million people and 64 chapters around the nation, you know, so very excited to be here. Of course, I'm speaking with you today from the occupied territory of the Canarsie people, otherwise known as Brooklyn, New York. Although I'm originally from Boriquen, which is the Taino name for the island of Puerto Rico. And so again, thanks so much for coming together for this panel discussion on agriculture and the regenerative movement, you know. And for some time now, the Sierra Club has focused on how regenerative agriculture can reverse climate change and improve people's health. And our current food system is a top contributor to greenhouse gases and has led to rising rates of obesity and diabetes and cancer and other health problems, you know, particularly among marginalized communities and communities of color and indigenous people. And to change, we need everyone to engage. And in particular, we must address these considerable inequities in order to get there, right? So I hope everyone's had a chance to watch the Kiss the Ground film. I watched it recently, and I was amazed by it. I learned so much, and sometimes, you know, when you're in your field, you think you know many things, and you have been exposed to many. And I thank you all so much for making this film and carrying this message forward. I hope all of you that have seen it, you have enjoyed it. If not, you should definitely do that as soon as we finish tonight. And we're really looking forward, you know, to talking about some of the topics in that Kiss the Ground has brought up, and you know, including how we can farm more regeneratively and where we can go from here. You know, I must say that I was today we hit nearly 70% degrees in Brooklyn, and so I started planting seeds, and I could not it's something that I do more or less every year in my backyard, but I couldn't not stop thinking about everything I saw in that film. So thank you so much. And so I will introduce the panel briefly so that we can get to the conversation. So first, Josh Tico is the co-director of Kiss the Ground and has worked on environmental issues for over 20 years. And his directorial debut was the 2008 Sundance Audience Award winning documentary Fuel. And on his side, we have Rebecca Tickell. Is also the co-director of Kiss the Ground film, as well as a producer and an environmental author and activist. She produced Fuel and co-director and produced The Big Fix and official selection of the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. Her directorial debut.
Thank you.
Wow, that's my apologies. I still think in Spanish in many cases. So, but yeah, he's her debut was the critical acclaimed documentary Pump. So we have also Ryland Engelhart, is the co-founder and executive director of Kiss the Ground. He's an entrepreneur, an activist, and the co-creator of the award-winning documentary May I Be Frank. He is also the host of Kiss the Ground's podcast. And then we're also going to hear from Mary Chambers. Is the chair of the Sierra Club California Sustainable Agriculture Committee. She earned her MS in Sustainable Agriculture from Stanford University, and most recently worked as a technical specialist for agricultural markets in IDE in Bangladesh. So we do have a lot of questions. For the first 30 minutes, we'll be discussing some of these questions that were submitted ahead of time to the panel. And during the last 30 minutes, we'll open up the discussion to audience questions. So I would like to start first with Josh and Rebecca. Can you please tell us, what was the inspiration behind this beautiful film that you have created?
Well, Ryland was part of it. He was one of the instigators. And we've made films. Kiss the Ground is our 14th environmental documentary film. We had made 4 films about oil. And right about the time that we were moving out of Venice Beach and Ryland was moving into our old place, he was like, you gotta learn about soil and sequestration and drawdown. And we were like, okay, Ryland, he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, soil can store all of the carbon that we've put in the atmosphere. And we thought the only thing harder than making 3 films about oil interesting would be making a film about soil interesting. There's that expression about boring is dirt. So it was definitely kind of a confronting at first, an idea of making this film. But then as we started to sort of dig deeper, so to speak, as 2 people who are really concerned with climate change and really committed to the earth, we started to see huge promise and just kind of like groundbreaking science about what the actual potential is here and a real pathway for how to reverse climate change. We realized that this had to be the subject of our next film. And not only could it not be boring, it had to be really good because the information is so important. And that's why we've spent the last 7 years working on Kiss the Ground.
Josh, you want to add something?
I'm excited that we've got all of these wonderful audience members from all over the country. It looks like we've got people from Florida, New York, California, New Mexico, just all over. And so welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time. You watched the movie. Presumably, if you haven't watched the movie, you go watch the movie after this. Thanks for taking the time to spend with us this evening. I think the major inspiration for this film is very simple. Every degraded ecosystem that we see on Earth can be regenerated, it can be restored. And so the promise or the hope for a planet that is in a state of restoration rather than a state of desecration is huge, because there is no other way that we're going to sustain 10, 11, 12 billion people on this planet other than regeneration. There's only one pathway for it. So you can't be for conservation and against regeneration. You can't be for ecology and against regeneration. It just doesn't make sense. This is really the new codification of the deep green ecology movement that has been happening since the late 1960s. And I think it's a powerful recodification. It's an intersectional movement. It's a diverse movement. Ultimately, it is a movement about restoring what once was, using the best that we have of native understanding, the best that we have of technology, and combining them. And that's a bright future for all of us to live into. So I think the ultimate inspiration for us, we have 2 children, 4 years old, 7 years old. The ultimate, 6.9, she's gonna be 7 in a couple of days. The ultimate inspiration is, wouldn't it be amazing if rather than saying, I'm sorry to our children, we could say, isn't this great? We are co-creating a restorational planet, a restorational economy, a restorational time for humanity. And that's what we've always loved about the Sierra Club, the commitment to beautiful, green Mother Earth, and all of the blue parts too. So it's wonderful to be here with you. We're inspired by the great work Sierra Club's doing, and I'm excited that so many people are inspired by the film.
Thanks so much, Josh and Rebecca, certainly. And again, thanks everybody that, that are tuned in. Apparently we have, right now over 250, 300 people from all over the nation. And, we're competing against the president. So that's quite remarkable, even though we want him to succeed in every capacity. But yeah, turning now to you, Ryland, could you tell us a bit about the Kiss Ground organization and how it started, goals, mission, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So as Rebecca shared, I moved into their house in Venice after a trip to New Zealand. And I had watched a panel called Can Human Beings Sustain Themselves on Planet Earth? And 5 out of the 6 experts said no. And 1 expert said, if we could think and understand as part of nature, and we could understand that photosynthesis and that the way our atmosphere and the way our world has created an environment where life can thrive, we could actually regenerate and actually take the problem of carbon in our atmosphere causing climate change and turn it into the solution of making carbon-rich soils under our feet. And that moment, for whatever reason, you never know what moment will change your life. That moment changed my life, where I could see how life could be existing 7 generations forward for the first time ever. Because up until that moment was like a slowly going off the cliff. And, to really get regeneration in my bones in that moment, I really got, wow, this is the most compelling, inspiring possibility that I've ever come across. And so literally in Josh and Rebecca's living room, I started gathering people as a volunteer group. And really the mission was, how can we awaken the message and the understanding of regeneration to a global capacity? And, we were in Los Angeles. We thought, well, media is probably the best way that we can do that, through building awareness. And we started an organization called Kiss the Ground. And quite shortly after there, had the opportunity of, partnering with Josh and Rebecca in a 7-year journey of making that film. But as an organization, we have 4 primary programs. We started off as a storytelling media organization. We've created over 60 short films that tell stories of regeneration. And then we have a stewardship or an education program where we create online courses for really building a cavalry of people who can get this story and this understanding in their bones, so that they can be, wherever they are in the world, can really be powerful communicators and advocates for this regenerative movement. So we have courses that we can empower people to be advocates for the regenerative movement. And then our third program is our farmland program, where we provide scholarships, mentorship, and soil testing for farmers so that they can make the transition to regenerative agriculture. And then our fourth program is working to convene policy leaders and experts to move policy to support regenerative agriculture. And yeah, and it's a real honor to be here, and I'm grateful for the Sierra Club really championing the message and the movement of regeneration. So thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Ryland. So so now turning into to Rebecca, you know, the film is basically an 84-minute glimpse into regenerative agriculture in the United States, but this is only a small part of the story, you know. So I wonder what are other components and stories that you think are important to the narrative of regenerative agriculture and practices?
I mean, I think for us, our focus really has been about conveying the basic information in a compelling way. So telling the story of carbon in the atmosphere is pretty challenging to do, especially when you're talking about something that's invisible. You can't really see it. And, you know, we think of it as this terrible thing that we want to go to war against, and we don't realize that we are carbon. So having people sort of be entertained and tell these personal stories of heroes who are out there working to bring regenerative agriculture to life, you know, that was definitely the mode for how we were going to convey it. But really, our goal was to reach a tipping point with the basic understanding of what drawdown is. Most people hadn't heard of biosequestration into healthy soil as a solution for how to get back down to where we want to be with carbon in the atmosphere and carbon in our oceans, CO2. So I think, you know, it was a challenging story to tell, because it's a story that's coalescing and has been coalescing as we've been telling the story over the last 7 years. And certainly we draw from all of these different cultures and practices that have been around for a long time, but never have we looked at it through the lens of specifically what's not working in America right now with our food system, and what practices can we put into place as a humanity to reverse the desertification that we're experiencing on a global level for the first time. Like 2/3 of the earth is desertifying. And so people are so shut down around the doom and gloom of climate change, and it makes people paralyzed. So you can't start off telling a story with people who aren't listening or who are too scared to even hear the information that you want to tell. So for us, the storytelling has been finding people who are inspirational, looking at what doesn't work, and then also weaving the doom and gloom, terrible news, which there's a lot of it, with the threads of hope, which also there's a lot of, and to the point where people get the gravity, they don't shut down, but also take action. And so it's been hard. I mean, I think we're getting more into the storytelling and the personal journeys, you know, in our next projects. This really for us was, how do we convey the basic principles on a global scale, and looking at the US in the last 7 years, what doesn't work. And, you know, just for background, my family, I'm the 7th generation of a farming family from the Midwest. And so I'll be the first one to tell you that that system is broken, and that system doesn't work, and that we can do better. And I think that's, for me personally, in addition to our kids, what motivated us. But, you know, I think that there are thousands of stories for people to tell around this that people haven't heard yet, that we haven't even heard yet, because this movement is happening right now. And we're seeing it, you know, explode. This is a moment where people have reached the tipping point of this basic understanding, and we can now really start to sort of dance in all the nuances of what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Thanks, Rebecca. Ryland, you know, these practices and philosophies that, you know, that Rebecca is talking about, you know, are not new by any means. You know, indigenous peoples have been living on this land since time immemorial, and only relatively recently in history has agriculture become unsustainable. So can you speak a little bit more about what people were doing to grow or obtain food before the industrialization of agriculture?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge. There could be our whole conversation could be around that. But what I do know, or what I do understand, is that I think the way we view the world obviously shapes the physical reality of the world, and I think we've become, as a civilization, much less connected to the earth and to the living, breathing the body of Mother Earth. And so, what I know is that many and most indigenous cultures lived in a much more relationship of reciprocity and understanding, and much more attunement to their environment, their place that they have lived and continue to live. So in that way, the philosophy of regenerative agriculture really is, how do we be supportive and attuned and adapting to this living system and supporting it to be continuing to be productive and regenerating. So I definitely know that there's, in California, there's obviously the tending the wild. There was indigenous cultures that were, had a lot of practices that were, helping restore and create a very biodiverse, ecosystem tapestry of life. But I also do know that, since the beginning of time, 10,000 years ago, since the beginning of agriculture, there's been, cultures that have been degrading ecosystems, such as like, the base of Chinese civilization, eroded, the Loose Plateau, which is in the film, or the Fertile Crescent, was, used to be fertile and was destroyed. So I know that there's been, many indigenous cultures that have really gotten this. And then I think there's been many cultures that, have grown their populations, and their populations couldn't sustain that living ecosystem. And so I think we're reckoning with that at a global scale of, are we, as Josh said, can we use the most, the best historical wisdom of indigenous thinking combined with, science and technology of this moment, so that we can, save this precious planet that we're all living on. So that's my answer of this now moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryland. Josh, there are many questions related to the incorporation of animals into farming systems, and which is a very sensitive topic, and the film speaks to it. Can you please elaborate on this topic? And of course, whoever else wants to join, Ryland as well. But yeah, please.
Well, look, I think it's a sensitive topic in terms of personal choice. What we choose to eat. The film doesn't preach, and nor do we preach about what somebody should or shouldn't have their own personal dietary choices be. I think that's a personal decision. Logistically speaking, 2/3 of the planet does not have sufficient rainfall to sustain tree cover at this point. So you've got 2/3 of the planet that's been degraded by human agriculture over the past 10,000 years. You got to understand, agriculture is a 10,000-year-old story. It began in the Fertile Crescent. And as humanity moved out, so did the story of agriculture. It's always the same story. We build empires, the population increases, and then the resource base implodes because we degrade the soil. So this has happened to 23 civilizations, and we're the biggest experiment. We're doing the experiment on a global scale. And this is the first moment where we have the ability to hit the reverse switch. We can literally reverse the experiment. So given the fact that we've deteriorated over 70% of the world's topsoil, given the fact that we've done most of that in a very short period of time, we now have a choice to make. We can begin to regenerate that topsoil, and with it, the ecosystems. We know from ecosystemic studies that you can regenerate an ecosystem. Much of the microbiome remains intact. It's dormant. It's stored in the sand. Even if the soil is degraded to silica, you can restore it because the biota is quiet. It's literally much of the microorganisms still exist, but they are not activated until they're in an aqueous solution, until they're in water. So how do you bring water to 2/3 of the planet's soil without sufficient rainfall? And the answer is simple: tall grasses. It's what existed prior to us denuding the land. That's what existed in the Great Plains of America, for instance. And how do you sustain tall grasses? Because if you grow a tall grass, it will oxidize within a year or two. It won't stay, right? So there's a natural cycle. And nowhere in nature do you find plants alone. Everywhere you find plants and animals. And the natural cycle is tall grasses grow, animals graze those tall grasses. They move in herds very quickly. The tall grasses, when they're pulled, the root structure gets pulled. It incentivizes new growth. The tops are cut, the grass grows again. It's a yearly cycle. So there is no other known way to restore 2/3 of the planet other than to herd hooved herding herbivores, grazers, across the land. And we don't do it like we do it today. We don't put them in animal feedlots, those horrible things that are immoral and unhealthy and should be outlawed everywhere, including the United States. We do it by moving animals in packs as predators would. Now, in every major experiment that's been done from Australia to the United States, across Europe and Africa, we see higher levels of sequestered carbon, sustained tall grasses, and renewed ecosystems. Well, that's what regeneration is. So there is really no way to do regeneration on a large scale without herbivores, without cows and bison, the very similar creatures that used to exist in those locations before humanity decided it was a good idea to destroy the entire ecosystem of those areas. So I think on one level, look, yes, people should eat what they want to eat in terms of their own personal choices. On another level, we have mountains of empirical peer-reviewed studies and evidence that suggest there is no technological fix. We can't plant 3 trillion trees to replace the 3 trillion trees we've taken before we restore the basic ecosystem functions of 2/3 of the planet. How do we do that? We do that with ruminants. And that's not a sensitive issue. That's what existed before we had so many human beings destroying so much ecosystem. So we aren't talking about a new system. We're talking about the original system. We're just saying, in order to make that original system work with highways and freeways and states and borders and all of the infrastructure that humanity's created, it's going to require management. It's going to require oversight. It's going to require human intervention. It took human intervention to make the mess that we're in, and it's going to take human intervention to fix it. But it's also going to take things with 4 legs. And that's what nature made. It made creatures that would restore the land. It's time for us to walk and work cooperatively with those creatures and not pretend that human beings are above them or somehow we're separate from them. It's all part of the ecosystem.
Well, thanks a lot, Josh, for that explanation. Yeah, it was very impressive in the documentary when you saw everywhere where the bison used to roam and you know how much we have depleted that, you know, and that was the natural fertilizer. And yeah, so again, thanks so much for everything that you taught us in that film. Now turning to Mary, that hasn't spoken yet. You know, I wanted to ask you, Mary, how does regenerative agriculture compare to other climate mitigation solutions in terms of its scale and its attractiveness?
Sure. So I'm very honored to be on the panel with everyone and happy to answer that. I would say there's a couple of things that makes regenerative agriculture a particularly attractive solution among other climate mitigation solutions. It has really a lot of co-benefits. So compared to how few downsides it has. So it can offer improved farm productivity, less use of water, less use of energy, less chemical inputs that can degrade and harm surrounding ecosystems in various ways. And that all means that it can contribute to the protection of biodiversity, the protection of water quality, and so on. Some of the techniques of regenerative agriculture can even actively provide habitat for animals and native plants. For example, the use of trees or the use of plant habitats for native insects. it's also potentially helpful from a social perspective. So diverse cropping managed on a smaller, more sustainable scale can help farmers become more economically stable compared to just growing a single crop whose price is controlled by large agribusiness monopolies. And when they have a more diversified farm system, farmers are often able to provide more stable employment for the people who work on those farms. So there's a social aspect to regenerative practice as well that makes it attractive as a climate solution. And then it's based on, relatively affordable, relatively uncomplicated technology. A lot of carbon sequestration technology that's coming on, looking really promising, is pretty complex and it can be very, very expensive. Whereas regenerative farming is relatively very low cost. Sequestering carbon in the soil, depending on the context, could be as low as like maybe $10 per ton of CO2 equivalent, depending of course on the context. The scale is still kind of something that's being figured out by researchers, and it depends a lot on the decisions that humans make in terms of policy, in terms of consumption choices and so on. One estimate that I've seen that I like is that a reasonable upscaling of regenerative ag and conservation techniques in the US might allow us to be offsetting around half of the GHG footprint of agriculture by 2050. But this could be a lot larger depending on policy decisions. Of course, it could be smaller depending on those decisions as well, which is why we have to advocate for an aggressive pursuit of this approach. So the way I like to think of regenerative agriculture is as a really important tool in a really important toolbox. It needs to come along with things like decarbonizing our energy system, better access to public transportation, and all those other tools that are so important in the fight against climate change. But it's a very attractive tool in this extremely crucial toolbox.
All right, thanks a lot, Mary. Okay, so I mean, since I promised people that after half hour we were going to switch to questions from the audience, I do have more questions that I would be interested in all of you to respond. But let's see, I'll get some of the questions from the audience. Please, everybody, the over 300 people connected nationwide, please write it down that we have people, and Alexander here, sending questions over. So, one of them, for example, how can people practice these concepts if they have a smaller property with perhaps just a garden or a lawn? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I think everybody in the last year has been starting, a COVID garden, if they have a little, even if it's in their window, because we're all craving nature so much. But I think, the idea is like, if you can plant a perennial, if you can plant a fruit tree or something that will continuously grow food for you, that's the start. If you can get a chicken or a few chickens and start to have your own eggs and, start the process of growing food on your property and like getting connected again with where your food is coming from, then you can even start to share goats with your neighbors if you can, or, swap things with people. I mean, I think just getting back to our roots and understanding where our food comes from. I mean, kids not knowing where a carrot comes from, that's crazy. We have to get reconnected with how we as human beings live on this earth, and where our food comes from and how our food is grown is an essential part of that. So like just little things that people can do in their own backyard. Composting is a huge one, of course. But I think the bigger question is the food system that's broken is not going to be fixed solely with people growing lemons in their backyard or whatever it is. We really have to look at overall, where is our food coming from and what system am I supporting each time I'm putting food in my mouth. I'm not going to tell you what food it is that you should put in your mouth, but ask yourself the question, am I regenerating the earth? Or am I degenerating the earth with this choice that I'm making, with this choice I'm feeding my family? Am I regenerating the earth? Am I helping to improve the quality in the soil, reverse desertification, draw down carbon and store water in healthy soil? Or am I degrading soil, promoting desertification, ultimately hurting the future? And that's a choice that each of us makes every single day, every time we put food in our mouth.
Thank you, Rebecca. Ryland, I think you raised your hand. do you want to add anything, or anybody else?
I mean, Rebecca did it. Rebecca did a great job. Yeah, I would say, yeah, very similarly. You know, the ability to create a garden and start being, yeah, connected to that, the life in our backyard, the life right here. We can tend to it. We can add value to it. We can actually create life by our participation with nature. And that's something that, as a civilization, that we've mostly, you know, as urbanites living in cities, have been very disconnected from. And so, you know, the idea of starting a regenerative victory garden, you know, is, you know, a new victory garden movement, and creating a really understanding of how can we keep the soil covered? How can we, you know, as Rebecca said, you know, have perennials? How can we make our compost that was food waste and turn that back into soil fertility that goes back into our soil? And then, you know, the satisfaction and joy of being able to harvest food that we've grown and share that with our family or our neighbors. You know, again, there's just not much more satisfying than that. I recently heard a statement that said, if you want to be happy for a few hours, drink a bottle of whiskey. If you want to be happy for a few years, get married. But if you want to be happy for a lifetime, plant a garden. So yeah, I think it's a really, really to know this bigger context that we're a part of supporting the regeneration of life by our little participation, even if it's just a very micro participation. It has us feel connected to a larger regeneration of life and supporting life on planet Earth. So thank you.
No, certainly. And you know, as I told you, you know, that I was enjoying the garden today, and of course, you know, recognizing, of course, the privilege of having a garden that I can plant in. But yeah, again, the film kept coming back to me, and as I was using, you know, cutting the whatever is left from last year, I remember, you know, that whole part on how the cows like just bite some of it and then leave the roots there. So I was keeping all the roots, then going back into the mix of, you know, with the compost from this past year and everything, and you know, again, kept coming back, and I hope that now I have the best soil that I have had in years because of the film. Okay, continuing with other questions from the audience. There's one here. Does the oh, sorry, Ryland?
Yeah, just again, because you asked the question, Mary was sharing like the potential of regenerative agriculture, and another beautiful quotation from Richard Teague put a paper out that calculated that regenerative agriculture can sequester 1.2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into its soils in North America alone, which would allow for over 50% to be mitigate, and actually would actually mitigate 50% of annual emissions that we're putting up each year. So that just in North America alone, regenerative agriculture could actually eliminate 50% of what we're currently releasing. So just another you know, compelling data point for the scale and possibility of regenerative agriculture as a solution.
Thanks. All right, and everybody take note of these numbers. Another question from the audience: does the organic matter in the soil that regenerative agriculture practices produce eventually break down and release carbon to the atmosphere?
I think we have to go back and look at a historical example of what background organic matter was in the United States and Europe over the Eurasian continent before industrialization versus what the average is today. In the US, we had background organic matter of anywhere from sort of 6% up to 14% organic matter. Today, you're lucky to find 4% in any given plot of soil. And so, you know, the bigger question is, from a historical perspective, where was the carbon and where is the carbon now? And the answer is we had a tremendous quantity more carbon in the soil, and now we have tremendous quantity more carbon in the atmosphere. So we know that the soil is the largest available carbon sink on Earth. We can't put more in the oceans. No one's advocating for that. We can't put more in the atmosphere. No one's advocating for that. And aside from a few, sort of Star Trekian techno wonder fixes, none of which has proved anywhere close to financially viable. The only solution that people have come up with is to put less carbon in the atmosphere. Well, yes, that's a wonderful idea, but over time, that's a slow slope. We're exceeding 400 parts per billion, and it's going up and up and up. And we know to have real sustainability on this planet, we don't need to be at 350. We need to be at 300. So how do we get there? How do we get there, barring some magical techno, alien stardust fixed? Very simple. We do it the natural way. We put it back in the soil. Is there carbon that comes out of the soil? Yes, absolutely. It is a carbon flow. It's a carbon cycle. And we can measure the balance of carbon on a net basis, on a yearly basis. When we degenerate soil, we lose carbon because we lose soil organic matter. When we lose soil organic matter, we lose the pump of carbon down into the recalcitrant layers of the soil. So if there are no long grasses, a grass may be 2, 3, 4, 5 feet even above ground, the depth of the roots is far greater. Those roots are a carbon pump. They're moving carbon from the topsoil, which is where soil organic matter is, down into the recalcitrant layers where it can stay for thousands of years. So yes, in a system in which you do not have a carbon pump, you do not have stable grasses pumping that carbon down, you will see a constant gain and loss of carbon. In a regenerative system where you've got tall grasses as well as trees, shrubs, bushes, and myriad of other flora and fauna interacting, you see a net negative basis of carbon on an annual basis every single time. That's how we know that this is a sequestering mechanism.
But if we stop roaming ruminants on the land and we go back to the practices that we're doing today, then yes, that soil organic matter will turn back to carbon and go back up into the atmosphere.
You're going to oxidize it and burn it off, and it'll go right back up.
But I mean, we took the topsoil of North America and we completely depleted it, and we can turn that around and we can bring that back up and just let's do it. Let's have a foot of more of soil organic matter and find ways to keep that in the soil this time.
Yeah, certainly. And I wonder if anybody else, Mary, do you want to also expand on this?
Sure. I would agree with everything that was previously said. And I'd also add that kind of as Rebecca was saying, it depends a lot on human management decisions. So whether that carbon is going to stay in the ground or leave, humans have a great deal of influence over that. And I think that's a scary thought, but it's also an exciting thought. And I think it's a real opportunity to realize how much influence we have. If we make the right decisions, we can keep a lot of that carbon in the ground. And there's more science coming out all the time around exactly what factors will optimize for that. But if we make the wrong decisions, that carbon can just get up and leave again. And that's why we need a strong policy framework. We need strong peer-to-peer farmer education so that these practices can continue on long into the future.
Thank you, Mary. Now, looking into other questions, for example, several people have asked why there weren't more people of color, especially indigenous people, in the movie. If you have heard from that feedback before, and how would you respond to that? I would add also, when I saw the images of most of the farmers, and how, maybe in my own thinking then, or my experiences, I was like, wow, this is like, the constituents that probably voted, against their interest for the former president. And where are the farmers of color that I'm sure, many of them, especially when you have the horrible experience, of slavery, but that was already in itself a corporate and often monocrop, but probably there were also sustainable practices. So I'm sure there's experience from that, and maybe this is also a moment to, if any of you know about the Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act and the Justice for Black Farmers Act, perhaps it's also a good moment to expand on it. So yeah, whoever wants to dive into this topic.
Well, at the risk of being the white guy that talks about the BIPOC, farmer issue, there, I want to point out a serious problem with agriculture in the United States. And that is the vast majority, over 95% of farmers and ranchers in this country are of a certain age, gender, and ethnicity. And specifically, average farmer in the US is 67, 68 years old and a white male. That's by far the normative situation. Obviously, we got to that situation through all sorts of terrible colonialization and patriarchy and unacceptable behavior that we don't want to perpetuate. But where we're at today, and we were just on an incredible panel with Senator Cory Booker, who's putting forward that incredible piece of legislation to really begin to bring Black and Indigenous farmers back into the fold. We have decimated our BIPOC farmer population, largely by actions that either disempowered or took land or effectively destroyed what was a very amazing farming knowledge-based community and group of people. And today we have 3.4 million people involved in agriculture in the US. 45,000 of them are Black farmers. And that's just a travesty. It's completely unacceptable. And so, look, could Kiss the Ground have been more diverse? Yes, absolutely. And this is an issue we're tackling in our upcoming projects, our upcoming films. But I also think people discredit the diversity that is there because it doesn't always look the way you think it should look. Ray Archuleta, he's perhaps one of the main characters. He's the first person you meet in the movie. Ray is Native American and Latinx, and he is one of the main voices in the film. So we do have those incredible, important voices. And I think everyone who's involved in regenerative agriculture agrees that there is a shift. There's a shift in the desire for a diverse movement, a movement that's intersectional, a movement that doesn't leave anyone out, and a movement that via its very nature brings up people who have been excluded, taken out, purposefully, exploited in this. And look, we grow junk in the United States, monocrop junk. We grow garbage corn, garbage soy, and garbage wheat, and then we spray them with tremendous amounts of chemicals.
And we subsidize it.
Yeah, we grow a monocrop of crops, and we have a monocrop of people growing that monocrop of crops. So obviously, we can't just fix the crops. We got to fix the human issue too. And look, I think we've learned a lot since making the movie. We've had a lot of deep discussions, and we're excited to dive into this issue in a way that I think is really going to bring to light a lot of the injustices that have happened in agriculture. So, first of all, thank you for the comment. Thank you for your comments on social media. Those of you who've been very vociferous about this issue, you are heard. We have definitely, done a lot of research, a lot of interviews, and done a lot of humbling conversations around this. So, and you all have our word that the future films are going to be vastly more representative on that issue. Yeah.
And I think we were also a little bit surprised in this process when we first got the footage in and we were looking at all of the farmers. I mean, they were all white men, all of them. I mean, when we went over the last 7 years to take a snapshot of America and agriculture, what you see in Kiss the Ground is a real slice of what that life has looked like. And I think it's obvious that it's time for a change, and the whole system is broken. So what a perfect moment to reinvent our food system and make sure that everyone is represented and treated fairly, and to fix where we've broken it in the past.
Thanks, and I hope when you do the sequels and you come to Puerto Rico, I can definitely direct you to a few female farmers that are doing great stuff, especially after Hurricane Maria. There's a whole movement around this, and I would say it's led for the most part by women. So so that's great, you know, and future is female definitely also in this field. I'm not sure if Mary or Ryland also wanted to comment on this. Mary?
Go ahead, Ryland.
Go for it, Mary.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that this is such a great parallel conversation, I think, for Kiss the Ground and Sierra Club to be having together, because the environmental movement is also, I think, experiencing hopefully a moment of productive reflection around how people of color and people from marginalized communities have not felt always welcome in the environmental movement. And I hope that this is the start of a really big change in both agriculture and environmentalism. And I think that we can learn from each other as we go through this change. So I see reasons for positivity.
Yeah, I'll just add one last thing, which is just that I'm hopeful that regenerative agriculture can be the movement that really does create social and environmental change together, and that it's a real beautiful moment where, because a lot of the philosophy and worldview of regenerative agriculture is coming from an indigenous perspective, that it is the movement that can really uplift and inspire, you know, all of us coming together, and that it really holds that possibility, and that I'm hopeful for.
I mean, nature is diverse. Nature, when it works and when it's thriving, is diverse. And I think humans, when we're thriving, we are really in sync and you know, really in harmony in our diversity as a species. That's where we're going to thrive.
And I guess I'd just like to add that one thing I would really look forward to, Josh, Rebecca, and Ryland, in your future work is seeing a real celebration of the successes that exist among a diverse community of farmers. Even if they're not always so visible, there are many successes to celebrate, and I look forward to hearing more about those.
We look forward to sharing those conversations. We're having a lot of conversations right now. We're working on the next follow-up films about soil. Here we are now, and we're on our second film that we're working on about soil. This is your fault, Ryland.
Yeah. Go.
But I think it's safe to say that we're really diving into this issue. We're really committed to this issue. Yeah.
Thanks. It's definitely appreciated, and definitely a lot of movement or comments in the Facebook chat around it.
Yeah, one more person that I'd just love to bring in. We just had a new board member join Kiss the Ground, the organization, amazing woman named Kara Boyd, and her husband is a gentleman by the name of John Boyd, who's been a civil rights activist and Black farmer from Virginia, who's really been fighting for the rights of Black farmers in the face of discrimination from the USDA over the last 25, 30 years. And I just recently had him on my podcast, and to hear the discrimination was appalling, and really like brought a brick on my chest of that reality, and just to follow John Boyd and the National Black Farmers Association and the work that they're doing to bring reform and rights and justice for Black farmers and getting access back to getting Black people on the land. They're doing amazing work. So just wanted to bring him into the space and acknowledge his work.
Thanks, certainly. And again, if you want for your podcast, some of the leading voices in Puerto Rico from the movement, there are great examples. And it's the more you bring these stories, the more people can, and the new generation can see it also as as a model to follow, and as a livelihood and as an option, and in Puerto Rico we had the idea that most farmers were old, and I would say that the vast majority, especially after Hurricane Maria, it's young people, young women leading this, and it's quite impressive. So I hope to channel some of those to your podcast, Ryland. So continuing.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Ramon.
All right, we'll follow up with that. Now, a few more questions. I want to note that we're getting on top of the hour, although we have space to go over that. Especially, the president is letting us go over time. He finished his speech, so we can stay a little longer if it's okay with everybody. And I'll go through some of the questions from the audience. So one quick, can we produce enough food to meet demand using regenerative agriculture?
I want to just chime in here about this. I think I love this question because this really gets me. I think this is so important that people understand the only way that we will have enough food to feed the world is through regenerative agriculture. It is a huge myth to think that we can control nature and we can spray and modify our way out of the crisis that we're in. That is, doing more of what we've done that doesn't work will not fix the problem. It will only lead to the exact opposite, ironically, of what the promise is. So if we really want to look at how do we feed 7 billion or 10 billion people or however many people it's going to be, we really have to just completely stop the conversation that we've been on around the idea that this technology, this man-made technology, will save us all, because that is a myth that benefits people who are lining their pocketbooks, not one that benefits people who eat food or who live on this earth. And so that is a huge myth that we're also diving into right now. But I think it's really important for people to understand that there is a campaign to convince people that in order to feed the world, we have to use these practices that are rooted in colonialism and are monocrop and chemical based, and not at all how we can actually increase our soil organic matter, increase our capacity to provide enough food for people, to stave off these giant climatological disasters. And ultimately, I mean, when you have a regenerative system, that system is so abundant. That's the system where we can feed the world.
And I imagine also, if you change that mentality, together with that comes so many other things that are in line with that. If we were talking before my previous panel, Jane Fonda, actually, she said she watched the movie, she loved it. One of the things, the only comment actually that she had was in the film, they think that if you fix this, or they portray as if they fixed it, then you fix everything. And that's the climate solution. And we were talking, of course, the challenges of putting everything that you want to say in just one film. But I do think that it's that mentality aligns then with so many other things. And I was wondering, as the character, I mean, which is not fictional character, I guess, is the reality of Gabe Brown, I think is his name, right? So I was always wondering, well, where was he politically before? Where is he now? Where does he see the future? And also, because I was checking his website and see how he charges, nicely, I mean, and rightly so, for giving conferences and everything. So there's a livelihood for him on that as well. But I wonder, about that, and how, is he and people like him in the wagon of changing, making the political changes that needs to happen? you know, and of course we cannot speak for him, but I wonder if I
Well,
just came up with that. And my apologies to the audience for getting out of the facilitator mode and asking that question myself.
Well, Ramon, actually, it's kind of ironic that you're asking. Not ironic. It's interesting because literally the first meeting of the House Agricultural Committee for the House of Representatives this year was around agriculture, forestry, and climate and their connection. And they showed the Kiss the Ground film in the committee meeting, and Gabe Brown testified for all these House of members, and really spoke to this essential this essential change that needs to take place. And this is obviously within the new administration, and speaking to this new administration with a lot of connectivity and hope of this is the future that we can, in the direction that we can go. So Gabe is he's an amazing human being, and he's totally on board, and and he's connected to, he knows that the political system needs to support this change as well, and he's supporting it to change.
Well, thanks a lot, Ryland. Let's see. Let's go for a few more minutes. I promise no more than say 10 minutes. So another question. Let's see. Many studies cited by regenerative agriculture proponents compare greenhouse gas heat trapping effects over time interval of 100 years. Which dilutes the impact of shorter-lived methane. If a shorter time interval is used for calculations, such as 20 or even 50 years, would the supposed climate benefits associated with regenerative style cattle grazing still remain? It's very technical. I don't know if anybody wants to.
It's a critical question. The short answer is yes. So we could leave it at that. Or I could dive deeper. Basically, we're talking about the difference.
1 minute.
Yeah. Look, methane is what's called a flow gas. Carbon dioxide is what's called a stock gas. So methane is constantly destroyed and moving through what's called the biogenic cycle in the atmosphere. We have to remember, before human beings industrialized the planet, we had far more ruminants, far more four-legged animals on the planet than we do have today. So we have to go back to the question of, why do we have increased methane value today as opposed to when we had more ruminants previously? And this is historical records, this is archaeological records. So the answer is very simple: human intervention. We squeeze these animals together, they don't move on the land, and we've got other sources of methane production, namely radical high production of methane from rice fields and from fracking. So we have additional methane stocks that are not being reabsorbed into the biogenic cycle. Carbon dioxide, you cannot argue with. It is a stock gas. Over time, it accumulates in the atmosphere. It doesn't dissipate unless you have a physical sequestration of that gas. There has to be a biochemical exchange, of which the oceans have done their best to absorb as much as possible. Trees have absorbed them as much as possible. So unless we create a biomechanical pump to move that carbon dioxide, the methane conversation is irrelevant, because we will outstrip the amount of capacity for the planet's atmosphere to hold carbon dioxide and balance temperatures long before we deal with methane. And yes, methane is far more insulating than carbon dioxide, but you've only got one way to put that. This is a binary issue. It's either too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or it's the right amount. And the only way to get the right amount is to put it somewhere. So, it's very simple. You need cows to do that. Will cows produce enteric methane? Yes, they produce far less when they grass finish and grass feed. There is growing evidence to show that there is bacteria that actually pulls the methane back, methanotrophs, into the biogenic cycle. Bottom line is, we have to do this. We have to pull the carbon dioxide out, or the planet will not be a place that human beings can live. We have exactly one mechanism to do it. So yeah, we're going to have to eventually deal with the fact that we've messed up the biogenic cycle, but that's not cows per se. That is massive amounts of fracking. That is massive amounts of rice generation. That is other sources of methane. And yes, the way we manage cows today produces excessive methane. The way we should be managing them produces a natural amount that's reabsorbed into the biogenic cycle. So,
I mean, and also in a perfect world, wouldn't we take whatever the native animal is to that region? Ideally, we would use whatever the native plants are, the native animals, and you would recreate the environment before human beings came in and interfered. And that's going to be the system that's going to have the most amount of drawdown. And the thing that I think surprised me the most in this process was learning that grasslands, as you've said, is by far the number one way to draw down and sequester carbon. You know, I would think that it would be a rainforest or it would be something like that. But to build topsoil in that healthy soil, you need to have the presence of these grasses that co-evolved with ruminants. And ideally it would be whatever the ruminants were that were there before we came in. But we're talking about America here and an industrialized food system. So I think that's why you speak primarily about cows. But in an ideal world, we would go back and it would look like it was before. Each region would have its own system that was really created for that region based on what was there before.
Well, you know, there's so many other great questions, you know, unfortunately we don't have, you know, too much time. So I think we're going to be moving to closing, you know, statements from the panel. But, you know, there were questions about, you know, better integration in the curriculum of schools and university, you know, and what about the leadership in the agencies? And there were many, you know, much opposition to Vilsack coming back as Secretary of Agriculture.
you just watched the film, by the way. You just watched Kiss the Ground.
What?
And he said that
he watched the movie. He did.
And it was he had a very positive reaction to it, and it was very promising. So we'll see how that pans out. And in response to the education, 100% from day one, our commitment was to make this film, but make it free for schools. So we have a 45-minute version of the film. It does feature, it's different from the feature film that you see on Netflix. It has this beautiful section on with Tony Ten Fingers. It talks about indigenous practices. Mm-hmm. It's not in the feature film. We love the short educational version of the film. It's free. You can go to kissthegroundmovie.com. It's free for educators, students, schools, parents doing remote learning. But it's 45 minutes long, and it's all the highlights from Kiss the Ground plus a few extra fun things that people will really love. And it's available now all around the world. There'll also be an educational curriculum that goes along with that, that's being developed by the National Science Teaching Association, that you can sign up for in time to receive for Earth Month. That will be available.
Okay, great. Well, I'm very glad to hear that that Vilsack watched the movie. He was Secretary of Agriculture by the time the French minister was trying to do that in Paris. So so hopefully this time around the U.S. can join that as well. Let's see. So you know, let's move towards closing. If any of you would like to give some closing remarks, leave us with some thought and more, of course, of the inspiration that you have transmitted to this great film and great work. But please, I'll leave you know, probably Josh and Rebecca first, since you may have the 4 and 6.9-year-old maybe
that's good
on your door. So so yeah, so please go ahead.
I mean, for me, it's just I'm so deeply honored and grateful to have been a part of this project, to learn that there is hope, and that, you know, if we can overcome all of our differences and, you know, not get stuck, you know, arguing over data that's actually insignificant in the big picture of things, I feel tremendous hope for what's possible for humanity. And I do, with all my heart, know that regenerative agriculture is the pathway forward for that.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. And look, we've as an environmental movement, we've been discussing the Gaia theory of a mass biological, if not consciousness, at least awareness that the planet is and represents for 50 years now. And I think it's time for us to realize that humanity has been managing planet Earth. We've been driving it like somebody who's blindfolded and drunk and driving the car backwards by using the rearview mirror. That's exactly how we've been managing planet Earth. So I think it is time for us as an ecology movement, an environmental movement, a green movement, to take the blindfold off, put our hands on the steering wheel, and accept responsibility that we are in a constant co-creation with a living, possibly aware, at least very reactive biological system. And we now have the science, we have the tools, and we have the data to be able to restore that ecosystem and to co-create with that ecosystem an abundant future that will provide food for every living human being and that will provide balance for the creatures and life forms on this planet. But we're going to have to manage that like participants, not like we're blind, not like we don't care, and not like it's just happening. And that's the opportunity that we have to regenerate Earth. So I'm excited to have that conversation with the Sierra Club. I'm excited you all are participating, and I can't wait to see this next chapter of the environmental movement. I think it's going to be beautiful.
Thanks a lot. Okay, Ryland and Mary, in 3 minutes. Ryland.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, just thank you, Ramon. Thank you, Sierra Club, for this amazing opportunity and for championing regenerative agriculture. It's definitely a dream come true to be here and to be standing at a place when regeneration as a context for humans on planet Earth is becoming a more known reality and a more known possibility. Kiss the Ground, the organization, really is doing our best to become a hub and an education center for any and everyone in the world to get resourced and understanding about how they as an individual can participate in the regenerative movement. So please, come check out kisstheground.com and, follow our social media threads. There's a ton of information we're putting out. And then, really our big call to action is getting people to become soil advocates. We have an amazing course designed for people to become, the cavalry that can be the voice that really champions this tipping point to continue to go in the direction that it's going. So really join our community. And it's really an honor to be in partnership. And I look forward to more partnerships with the Sierra Club in the future. So, and thank you, Mary, and thank you, Josh and Rebecca, for being here. And thanks, Josh and Rebecca, for being amazing partners and amazing filmmakers and making this beautiful vision come true.
Thanks, Ryland. And Mary, you may have different points you wanted to intervene before. My apologies.
No, I did want to mention one thing when we were talking about what people can do at home to participate in the regenerative movement. Even if you aren't able to regeneratively grow your own food, planting native plants, planting insect habitat, planting native perennials, trees, that is also part of ecosystem regeneration. And I think it's a really valuable contribution. So if you don't have room for a lemon tree, plant a manzanita bush or something else that's suitable for your local ecosystem. And I also just want to share, I know Sierra Club people tend to be really interested in policy advocacy. I think there's just some really hopeful examples across the US of policy that is progressing, that supports healthy soils. California has some great climate smart agricultural policies. They're being echoed in states across the country. And I think that's a great momentum that we're seeing. And I think Sierra Club has a lot of excitement toward continuing to work on this topic. We've been joining and learning from other organizations like the 4 per 1,000 initiative. And I would just encourage everyone to look at the local level of Sierra Club where you are and encourage your local chapter to start getting involved in agricultural issues and see how agriculture and the environment can be a partnership and can work together for positive change, not necessarily as adversaries. So yeah, we as the Sierra Club have an important role to play here in the Agriculture Environment Connection, and I'm so glad we got to have this fabulous conversation with our partners.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mary, and thanks to all of you, all the panelists, and everybody who was with us in the last hour and 15 minutes. Thanks for joining. Let's continue this conversation, and please join, the Food and Agriculture Grassroots Network team at the Sierra Club. If you have an interest to engage within your community, please do so. We will be following up with an invitation to join, and hope many of our Sierra Club chapters will engage in this grassroots effort to help connect farmers with communities in need. So yeah, thanks so much for everything, and hope to see you all soon, hopefully in person. Get vaccinated, take care of all of you, and yeah, we'll see each other soon.
And eat
So
some
much.
regeneratively grown vegetables.
Yes.
Yeah, actually,
Thank you, everybody, for watching.
One final note is there's an amazing map called from Regeneration International. They made a map of all the regenerative farms across the country and even globally. You can find it at kisstheground.com or Regeneration International. But it's an amazing way to start eating, a few ingredients that are coming from regeneratively sourced farms and ranches. So check that out. And yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a beautiful night.